Welcome back. You're watching Africa Rising here on CNBC Africa, where we're talking to President Jacob Zuma. Now, Mr. President, before we took the break, I discussed the fact that we want now to talk about South Africa-specific issues. And I think of all the issues that we can discuss about South Africa, one issue is top of mind: jobs, jobs, jobs. We actually have a little strap that we run across our programs when we're discussing employment creation, etc., that we call jobs, jobs, jobs 3 times. It is an important issue for you. It is an important issue for every South African. And the big question that keeps being asked is, have we done enough in terms of policy formulation to create the environment for the private sector, as well as perhaps the state, to create the jobs that the country needs?
Well, we have done something. Whether that is enough or not enough is a different matter. Partly because we are not dealing with an easy task.
True.
In terms of creating jobs. As I said earlier, there is a history behind it, but also, as we really said, here are the plans. There was a global situation that, in a sense, impacted on what we're doing. But I think we have plans. We have policies that are moving forward. We have given ourselves, for an example, a period within which to create a particular percentage of jobs. We are working very hard. Part of what we have done, for an example, we have done a number of things, including the plan with regard to the infrastructure,
right,
which is going to create jobs. I think that's what the government could do to create the environment, an enabling environment for the investors to come. We are talking to investors. We are going to be organizing some gathering to talk to them, to actually practically show here are the opportunities.
Sure.
In what we have said to the nation about the infrastructure, we have actually said we are opening it nationally. There is no part of this country that is not going to see infrastructure coming up. If that would not be seen as an important plan to create jobs, I don't know what else could people see, that in fact we are there and the private sector must see these opportunities. We are no longer saying come to South Africa and invest their opportunities. Sure. In generalities. We are saying here are the plans, very specific. Come and invest. I think it is a question of the private sector coming in to the party. From our part, I think we continue to do our part to say here are the opportunities. And we are even looking at the issues that we are discussing to make it easy for people to do business in South Africa. That's part of what we are dealing with. We are looking at what are the bottlenecks and impediments that delay people who are doing business. Those are the issues we are dealing with. In other words, all the time creating an enabling environment for investments to come in.
I'm sure the private sector leaders who are here, who are listening, will have been very glad to hear you say you are addressing the issues of delays and all other little bottlenecks that make it difficult for them to create employment. Now, of course, the thorny issue in South Africa around jobs creation is the whole issue of labor reform, the whole issue around the laws of the country that enable people to hire and fire people. It's a very touchy subject. The unions don't like it. But from where you sit, is there a need to look at those laws again and make them, I don't know, do we want them to be investor-friendly while at the same time protecting workers? Of course we do. But how do we strike that balance?
That is a challenge. Could we all agree how to strike that balance? As you know, people come from different corners, and therefore it's not going to be easy. Partly in South Africa, because of the history again, because the laws historically were very much against the workers. In fact, some sectors were not even recognized as workers. So the workers have worked very hard to ensure that we get into the situation where we are. So if you said, let us change the laws,
sure,
when they're still complaining about many other things, it's not an easy debate. But I think as a country, we need to work towards reaching a common understanding, some compact of all social partners to look at different issues. That issue could be an issue that people will raise, and I'm sure the private sector raises this issue all the time.
Sure.
But we need to have a platform where this issue is discussed as to what is it that make each party feel very strong about his own position.
Yeah.
I don't think it's an issue. If the issue is raised, I believe always, if the issue is raised, it must be talked about. We are a country that is very fond of discussing issues. So if we think we need to balance, let us come with facts and say, this is what we say. Because I've had workers raising their own issues about what the private sector must do.
Sure.
And I've heard the private sector saying, we think this government must do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And of course, we create the environment, which also includes the environment where we could talk in order to balance. I don't think it's an easy one,
Sure.
but in the process of that, the critical point is that we are faced with a problem in this country of poverty, inequality, unemployment. We cannot run away from discussing these issues. Are the issues that we are raising having any negative impact to these three issues?
Sure.
We need to talk about it because everybody agrees at least that we need jobs so that we can change the quality of lives.
Sure.
If that is the case, what are the concrete things that we need to do? I think both private sector and the labor, of course, and government, and the social partners, the constituency out there, the communities,
Yes.
should have to come together. We do need to face the reality as to what is it that we need to do that will work for us as a country.
So the question then becomes, Mr. President, do we need a CODESA? Some people have suggested that we need a summit where we sit with all the stakeholders and debate these issues.
Well, some say so, some don't think we need a CODESA. Whatever people will agree, I'm sure we will not have a difficulty.
Sure.
As long as the platform is created. Do we need a CODESA? What would the CODESA mean? Because we have, for an example, we've got NETLEC, where all these partners are there discussing.
You're already talking.
We are already talking. So what else are we talking about? I've heard people who are talking about CODESA are people who are not in this, particularly political parties.
Right.
They are very keen to say we need a CODESA. Now, it's because they're not there. They're not there because people perhaps did not vote enough for them to be there. So you can't solve other problems in a wrong way. We have this institution, the NETLEC, is actually a unique one that produces this. We have discussed some of the issues, very important issues, agreed, all of us who are there. So, but I'm not saying we cannot have a CODESA.
Sure.
If people think we need to have a CODESA, I've got no difficulty with that. But people have got to motivate it very strongly to say these are the reasons. It shouldn't be solving other problems through CODESA, which are not the problems we are looking at.
The President is open to a discussion on the issue. Mr. President, we need to cross now to Nairobi. As I said to you, we integrate Africa. So I'd like to demonstrate once again what we can do. And we're joined now from our Nairobi studios by Mr. Vimal Shah. He's the CEO of Bidco Oil Refineries, and they operate throughout the whole East African region. He's got an issue around the cost of doing business in Africa. Mr. Shah.
Mr. President, the cost of doing business in Africa have been prohibitive to become globally competitive, mainly due to poor infrastructure and laws and policies that make us into silos as countries, and thereby we are not generating enough jobs in Africa for our growing population. Do you see a social crisis in Africa going forward? And if so, what would you recommend or do in order to restore peace and harmony in our societies in Africa?
Sir?
Well, I don't see a social crisis in Africa. I see prosperity coming to Africa. As I've been just saying, African countries have realized we could not live in silos that were created by colonialism. Because again, the silos are not the making of the Africans. I think that point must always be remembered.
Sure.
They were made into silos. Africa says we cannot remain in silos. Let us come together. First thing they established was the Organization of African Unity, to unite politically, to have issues that politically were agreed. Then the AU, the Union. We are now discussing the economic coming together, the integration.
Sure.
In that, we are also discussing the infrastructure that therefore does away with the silos. We are in fact in the process. We've recognized that where we are now in the process, we are agreed we've got to work together. We have discussed this matter as a great deal some years ago, that if you wanted to go to one part of Africa from one, you have got to fly to Europe overnight.
Sure.
And then fly from Europe to Africa. We have said that must end. We are doing connectivity in terms of the airlines, but we are saying that is not enough. We are doing roads and rail. We are doing everything to ensure that there is connectivity. We are talking about intra-trade. I don't therefore think that with all of those activities, somebody can say there could be a social crisis in the continent.
Sure.
It's actually the opposite. We are beginning to identify ourselves as one in one continent. We are no longer defining ourselves as former Portuguese, former French, former English, former Belgians. That is gone. We are the Africans in the African continent, working together. We are discussing how do we take the wealth of this continent to benefit the continent? How do we industrialize this continent? How do we work together? So I don't think we could predict a social crisis. In fact, I think we are doing well towards ensuring that we share the challenges, we share the benefits, we share the economic development in particular.
Yeah. Now, one of the issues that you addressed in your recent State of the Nation address is all the whole issue around what we've just been discussing, infrastructure spend, and trying to get the private sector to try and create jobs. Now, is it a question of spending more money, or is it a question of ensuring that the policies that we have, we fine-tune them so that they are able to create just this panacea that we're looking for in terms of the environment that enables the private sector to work better?
I think it is both. You need money. We can't say we don't need money.
We do.
Absolutely. We need to invest. But I think it's actually the question of how do you coordinate what we do? How do you coordinate that? Because you could have infrastructure, but in silos, as the good brother was talking about silos.
Sure.
That is why, in the State of the Nation address, we talked about the Presidential Infrastructure Coordination Commission, precisely to say in a country, you need to coordinate what you are doing. In other words, you need to begin to plan. We now have adopted an implementation plan in the country.
Sure.
This also connects to Southern Africa, but it connects with the two African continents. In other words, how do we plan our activities? Well, that becomes important.
Sure.
Because if there is no coordinated plan, then you can't make progress. I think it is a question of how do we coordinate in the regions, what we want to do, how do we put these together in a number of ways.
Sure.
If we can't do so, even if we could have the resources, it would be very difficult to make quick progress forward. But even if we did not have enough money, but if we had clear plans and we coordinated what we're doing, we prioritized what we need to do first. We knew what must come first, what is it that will, in a sense, have ripple effects in what we do, I think we'll go a long way. And we have started doing so. If you look at SADC, SADC has very clear plans that deal with the region.
Sure.
And as I talked about 3 regions, we are actually discussing how the 3 regions come together. You know, sitting in the AU, in the NEPAD section, that really deals with the economy plans and the economy thinking of the continent.
Sure.
Very much pleasing when people could put on the table the roads, details of the roads that connect in the corridor that we are talking about.
Sure.
Linking countries, country after country. I don't think we could fail if you do so. So that's what we need, the plan and the people with expertise to do it,
yeah,
and then the resources.
And the people with the money. And I'm very glad because we've got the people with the money with us here in the studio today.
That's why I'm talking like this. I want them to know there are opportunities here. They mustn't delay. Because if they delay sitting here,
yeah,
others are going to come and
Guys,
they'll complain and say, we were there, but we were not, informed. That's why I'm informed.
Guys, don't delay. Let's certainly see if we've got questions around us here. I see Mr. Stephen Kose from Investec. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Mr. President, I think you've answered a lot of the questions that I was going to ask, but I think the big issue that we see is the cooperation between the private sector and government. And the Minister of Finance at his budget speech made quite a strong point that we're all in this together and we all have to help ourselves together. And what we feel in the private sector is that government is skeptical of the private sector, and even though the Minister of Finance made a big point about the private sector participating in infrastructural development, you hear from other departments saying that, well, they don't really need the private sector. And I think government can't do this job on their own. I think we really have to be in it all together, and we have to create that enabling environment that you spoke about. So I'd just like to hear your view, how you're going to ensure that we all cooperate together and that the private sector plays its role in investing and in assisting government in managing and developing some of the infrastructure. That's a question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I would be very keen to know what are these departments that are skeptical, because I would want to be able to handle those departments. Because we don't want any department to be skeptical. Because you cannot do anything as government without the private sector. And that's our belief, that is our philosophy. For an example, what we have done now, we have addressed the nation on our thinking, where we articulated some of these issues. But we are actually preparing and organizing an investment conference, wherein we'll now be dealing with the private sector very specifically, no longer through the finance kind of budget or the State of the Nation address, which also addresses the private sector, so to speak, but actually to have a conference where we could talk very specifically on the specific issues. In fact, it is coming very soon, because we thought that it was important to have that direct engagement so that we can say these are the issues, that the private sector could also raise issues, because we would want to hear what is it that makes it difficult for you to do business, so that we address those. We have, for an example, taken a decision that in order for the infrastructure to move faster, we are going to borrow from our experience of 2010, how we actually legislated for a law so that instead of taking too long to deal with these projects, there will be an act that is going to make us move quicker. So we'd like to discuss that, we'd like the input from the private sector. So we are ready, really, that we work together as partners.
I think the President has made a very important statement, and I just want to quote it again. The government cannot do anything without the private sector. That came from the President himself. We've got another question, and let's see who is available. Yes, Mr. Yunus Suleiman from KPMG. Thank you. Just go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Mr. President, for your insightful comments. I want to congratulate you and the National Planning Commission on behalf of all corporate citizens on the National Planning Commission's vision for 2030. In fact, at the recent conference, we spoke about it, and my opening comments were that I look forward to enjoying the success of the plan with my grandchildren in 2030. But my question is, and that came out of the conference as well, is it too ambitious, and do you have any concerns about the achievement of the plan?
The plan from the Commission?
From National Planning Commission,
From
yes.
National Planning Commission. You know, I am excited about that plan. When we said we needed a national plan, it was because we were trying to deal with the legacy of silos. Governments, general or departments working, doing a lot of good job, but the question was, what is that we are trying to do? Where are we taking South Africa to? You need to have a plan that whatever we do, whether at the national government or at the provincial or local, there must be a plan that is overarching, that everything we do moves in a certain direction. I'm happy that the plan has been worked out. But also, what is important, we did not say either the ruling party must work out this plan or the government. We wanted South Africans who have expertise and talent to participate. That is why the National Commission is not part of government, it's outside. So that we've got independent minds that could look at the situation, not subjectively. I'm very happy because that now, what is going to finally come after the contribution by everybody else, is going to be the national plan. Not the plan of the ruling party or of the government, of the South Africans altogether who have participated in making it. So I'm very excited that all of us are going to own this plan, and therefore all of us are going to implement it. Whatever we are going to be doing, it must be talking to the plan. I think it is exciting to me that as a country, we can tell people, here is a plan. Whatever we do, whether we talk about the new growth path, whether we talk about the infrastructure plan, it must talk to this plan. It can't be outside. So at least there is a collective thinking of all of us. So I'm very happy, and I'm sure when you have your grandchildren implementing it, you'll be happy as a participant.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. President, it does appear like the private sector has got jobs on its mind. But of course, we know that they want to create jobs because by creating more jobs, they're creating more consumers for the consumption of their goods. Absolutely. So there is a motive on both sides to try to create jobs. Let's see if we can take any more questions. Yes, we've got Nonkulula Nyambezi Haita, CEO ArcelorMittal. Thank you for joining us, Gu.
Thanks, Godfrey. President Zuma, my question takes you back to the African trading story that you spoke about earlier. And just as you're very excited about the NPC plan, I'm very excited about the notion of trade within the African continent and the seriousness with which today's African leadership is taking this story. But now, to go to a practical example of what we have to contend with in trying to make this operational. A large South African food retailer recently said they trade in 13 SADC countries, and when they send their trucks from South Africa to go around delivering food to all of these countries, the truck goes with 1,600 different pieces of documents, from import duties to trading licenses to export duty. So my question is, from where you sit and in the conversations that you have, not necessarily within the African Union, but just in our small corner here down in Southern Africa, what can the business sector look forward to in terms of streamlining the trading links within the SADC countries, and what sort of time frame do you think we can be looking at to get all of this sorted out?
Time frames, Mr. President.
Yes, time frames, absolutely. SADC has been discussing this issue. In fact, we have had a number of meetings of the ministers of Home Affairs to deal with the question of the borders, which is part of what makes those who drive the trucks carry a lot of paper. That's part of what we would like to hear in the conference that I talked about with the private sector. Because from the government point of view, we might be saying we want to do things properly, not to make mistakes, and therefore create a lot of paper, which in a sense acts against what we're trying to achieve. I think in that conference, I would actually invite business to articulate those kind of things in some details, that these are the bottlenecks that you have, because I think we are ready as the countries to do away with things that are going to delay the doing of business or the intertrade. Some of the things that we have come across, we are addressing, but we may not be addressing them accurately and sufficiently, because we might not be informed as to how much it is delaying business. I was in Uganda not long time ago and learned from South African companies that are there, telling me how long it takes to bring commodities from South Africa. And those are things you generally, under normal circumstances, we are not aware of until you meet people who are concretely having the difficulties and challenges that they're faced with. So I'll be very happy that in that conference that we are organizing, these matters are brought up so that as SADC, in one meeting, we can discuss these matters and take resolutions. Because if we are dealing with different countries, with different kind of authorities, You would have to have that kind of a discussion. That discussion will make a lot of sense if there are concrete, practical examples articulated, where we'll then say, whilst we want to integrate, but these are the obstacles that are facing us, so that we could take action. I'm very happy that we have raised the issue, because it doesn't help to say we want to be everywhere, we want to intertrade, but not address the concrete, practical things that makes it very difficult to happen.
Mr. President, I'm going to recommend that the Office of the President and all the government departments make sure that they've got channel 410 on their decoders, because the story that Nku is referring to actually was given to us here. We spoke to the CEO. I can reveal the name of the CEO. It's Whitey Basson, CEO of ShopRite, and he spoke on this table here about the issues of all these 16,000 documents. So they should be watching CNBC Africa. But there's a burning question that's coming out of Nigeria. And Mr. BC Onasanya, Group Managing Director of First Bank, just wants to address one issue that I know the government has in part addressed, the whole issue of making sure that we work together to make it possible for business to do, for private sector to do business in each other's countries. It's in Nigeria. Mr. Onasanya, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. In Nigeria, you have a number of South African companies doing very well. Now, it's extremely difficult to find today a non-South African African entity doing very well in South Africa. Now, don't you think there's a need to review the business reciprocity rules and practices of South Africa in relation to its South African brothers?
Yeah, well, I think if there are difficulties of that nature, I think we should review the rules. I agree. Because it is part of what we are discussing. How do we make it easy for business to do business wherever? If there are difficulties and there are bottlenecks, I think that's what we need to deal with. I therefore agree that we need to review how the two countries or many other countries are able to make business that when you come to a country, you don't feel a stranger. You are able to do a business easily. How do you deal with the rules, for an example, of how to register your business, etc.? In other countries, because of our history, it takes many days before you establish your business. But there are countries in SADC already where it takes a very short time. Zambia is one such example. And we discussed this in SADC. Why can't we move towards that direction wherein doing business, we are not going to frustrate a business person who has come here, who has no time to sit here and wait for a long time, so that it comes in, does business, goes back, and the business begins. So I agree. We might need to review those kind of rules and actually make them easier.
Mr. President, we could go on all night and discuss this all night, and it would certainly be a very rich conversation, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Africa Rising and CNBC Africa, and for being our first guest in this series that we hope we will enable conversation to take place between African leaders across the continent as well as the private sector. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. You must notice that we are very passionate about changing Africa. And therefore we would like to partner with the private sector, including the private sector and the media. That the media must be positive about this positive continent. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I'll remember that the next time I conduct my interviews. President Jacob Zuma has been our first guest here on CNBC Africa at Africa Rising, and it's the start of a new series, as I said. We certainly wish him in his, as he ends the first term, and secondly, look forward to Mangao. To our studio audience, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and also to our guests in Abuja, in Lagos, in Nairobi. Thank you and good night.